Welcome to another episode of Mike Reads. Tonight we'll be continuing our series on Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations with our second read in Book 5, Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is entitled Of Public Debts. I actually don't have anything to add before we get started, so let's just dive right on in. During the reign of Queen Anne, the market rate of interest had fallen from 6 to 5%, and in the 12th year of her reign, 5% was declared to be the highest rate which could lawfully be taken for money borrowed upon private security. Soon after the greater part of the temporary taxes of Great Britain had been rendered perpetual and distributed into the aggregate, South Sea, and general funds, the creditors of the public, like those of private persons, were induced to accept of 5% for the interest of their money, which occasioned a saving of 1% upon the capital of the greater part of the debts which had been thus funded for perpetuity, or of 1/6 of the greater part of the annuities which were paid out of the three great funds above mentioned. This saving left a considerable surplus in the produce of the different taxes which had been accumulated into those funds, over and above what was necessary for paying the annuities which were now charged upon them, and laid the foundation of what has since been called the sinking fund. In 1717, it amounted to £323,434, 7 shillings 7 1/2 pence. In 1727, the interest of the greater part of the public debts was still further reduced to 4%, and in 1753 and 1757 to 3.5% and 3%, which reduction still further augmented the sinking fund. A sinking fund, though instituted for the payment of old, facilitates very much the contracting of new debts. It is a subsidiary fund always at hand to be mortgaged in aid of any other doubtful fund, upon which money is produced to be raised in any exigency of the state. Whether the sinking fund of Great Britain has been more frequently applied to the one or to the other of those two purposes will sufficiently appear by and by. Besides those two methods of borrowing, by anticipations and by perpetual funding, there are two other methods which hold a sort of middle place between them. These are that of borrowing upon annuities for terms of years, and that of borrowing upon annuities for lives. During the reigns of King William and Queen Anne, large sums were frequently borrowed upon annuities for terms of years, which were sometimes longer and sometimes shorter. In 1693, an act was passed for borrowing £1 million upon an annuity of 14%, or of £140,000 a year, for 16 years. In 1691, an act was passed for borrowing £1 million upon annuities for lives, upon terms which in the present times would appear very advantageous. But the subscription was not filled up. In the following year, the deficiency was made good by borrowing upon annuities for lives at 14%, or at little more than 7 years' purchase. In 1695, the persons who had purchased those annuities were allowed to exchange them for others of 96 years, upon paying into the exchequer £63 in the 100. That is, the difference between 14% for life and 14% for 96 years was sold for £63, or for 4.5 years' purchase. Such was the supposed instability of government, that even these terms procured few purchasers. In the reign of Queen Anne, money was upon different occasions borrowed both upon annuities for lives and upon annuities for terms of 32, of 89, of 98, and of 99 years. In 1719, the proprietors of the annuities for 32 years were induced to accept in lieu of them South Sea stock to the amount of 11.5 years' purchase of the annuities, together with an additional quantity of stock equal to the arrears which happened then to be due upon them. In 1720, the greater part of the other annuities for terms of years both long and short were subscribed into the same fund. The long annuities at that time amounted to 666,000, £821, 8 shillings 3.5 pence a year. On the 5th of January, 1775, the remainder of them, or what was not subscribed at the time, amounted only to £136,453, 12 shillings 8 pence. During the two wars which begun in 1739 and in 1755, little money was borrowed either upon annuities for terms of years or upon those for lives. An annuity for 98 or 99 years, however, is worth nearly as much money as a perpetuity and should, therefore, one might think, be a fund for borrowing nearly as much. But those who, in order to make family settlements and to provide for remote futurity, buy into the public stocks would not care to purchase into one of which the value was continually diminishing. And such people make a very considerable proportion both of the proprietors and the purchasers of stock. An annuity for a long term of years, therefore, though its intrinsic value may be very nearly the same with that of a perpetual annuity, will not find nearly the same number of purchasers. The subscribers to a new loan, who mean generally to sell their subscription as soon as possible, prefer greatly a perpetual annuity redeemable by Parliament to an irredeemable annuity for a long term of years of only equal amount. The value of the former may be supposed always the same, or very nearly the same, and it makes, therefore, a more convenient transferable stock than the latter. During the two last mentioned wars, annuities, either for terms of years or for lives, were seldom granted but as premiums to the subscribers to a new loan, over and above the redeemable annuity or interest upon the credit of which the loan was supposed to be made. They were granted not as the proper fund upon which the money was borrowed, but as an additional encouragement to the lender. Annuities for lives have occasionally been granted in two different ways, either upon separate lives or upon lots of lives, which in French are called tontines, from the name of their inventor. When annuities are granted upon separate lives, the death of every individual annuitant disburthens the public revenue so far as it was affected by his annuity. When annuities are granted upon tontines, the liberation of the public revenue does not commence till the death of all the annuitants comprehended in one lot, which may sometimes consist of 20 or 30 persons, of whom the survivors succeed to the annuities of all those who die before them, the last survivor succeeding to the annuities of the whole lot. Upon the same revenue, more money can always be raised by tontines than by annuities for separate lives. An annuity with a right of survivorship is rarely worth more than an equal annuity for a separate life, and from the confidence which every man naturally has in his own good fortune, the principle upon which is founded the success of all lotteries, such an annuity generally sells for something more than it is worth. In countries where it is usual for the government to raise money by granting annuities, tontines are upon this account generally preferred to annuities for separate lives. The expedient which will raise most money is almost always preferred to that which is likely to bring about in the speediest manner the liberation of the public revenue. In France, a much greater proportion of the public debts consists in annuities for lives than in England. According to a memoir presented by the Parliament of Bordeaux to the King in 1764, the whole public debt of France is estimated at 2,400 millions of livres, of which the capital for which annuities for livres have been granted is supposed to amount to 300 millions, the eighth part of the whole public debt. The annuities themselves are computed to amount to 30 millions a year, the fourth part of 120 millions, the supposed interest of that whole debt. These estimations, I know very well, are not exact, but having been presented by so very respectable a body as approximations to the truth, they may, I apprehend, be considered as such. It is not the different degrees of anxiety in the two governments of France and England for the liberation of the public revenue which occasions this difference in their respective modes of borrowing. It arises altogether from the different views and interests of the lenders. In England, the seat of government being in the greatest mercantile city in the world, the merchants are generally the people who advance money to government. By advancing it, they do not mean to diminish, but on the contrary, to increase their mercantile capitals. And unless they expected to sell with some profit their share in the subscription for a new loan, they never would subscribe. But if by advancing their money they were to purchase, instead of perpetual annuities for lives only, whether their own or those of other people, they would not always be so likely to sell them with a profit. Annuities upon their own lives they would always sell with loss, because no man will give for an annuity upon the life of another, whose age and state of health are nearly the same with his own, the same price which he would give for one upon his own. An annuity upon the life of a third person, indeed, is, no doubt, of equal value to the buyer and the seller, but its real value begins to diminish from the moment it is granted and continues to do so more and more as long as it subsists. It can never, therefore, make so convenient a transferable stock as a perpetual annuity, of which the real value may be supposed always the same, or very nearly the same. In France, the seat of government not being in a great mercantile city, merchants do not make so great a proportion of the people who advance money to government. The people concerned in their finances, the farmers general, the receivers of the taxes which are not in farm, the court bankers, etc., make the greater part of those who advance their money in all public exigencies. Such people are commonly men of mean birth, but of great wealth, and frequently of great pride. They are too proud to marry their equals, and women of quality disdain to marry them. They frequently resolve, therefore, to live bachelors, and having neither any families of their own, nor much regard for those of their relations, whom they are not always very fond of acknowledging, they desire only to live in splendor during their own time, and are not unwilling that their fortune should end with themselves. The number of rich people, besides, who are either averse to marry, or whose condition of life renders it either improper or inconvenient for them to do so, is much greater in France than in England. To such people, who have little or no care for posterity, nothing can be more convenient than to exchange their capital for a revenue, which is to last just as long, and no longer than they wish it to do. The ordinary expense of the greater part of modern governments in time of peace being equal or nearly equal to their ordinary revenue, when war comes, they are both unwilling and unable to increase their revenue in proportion to the increase of their expense. They are unwilling, for fear of offending the people, who by so great and so sudden an increase of taxes would soon be disgusted with the war, and they are unable, from not well knowing what taxes would be sufficient to produce the revenue wanted. The facility of borrowing delivers them from the embarrassment which this fear and inability would otherwise occasion. By means of borrowing, they are enabled, with a very moderate increase of taxes, to raise, from year to year, money sufficient for carrying on the war, and by the practice of perpetual funding they are enabled, with the smallest possible increase of taxes, to raise annually the largest possible sum of money. In great empires, the people who live in the capital, and in the provinces remote from the scene of action, feel, many of them, scarce any inconveniency from the war, but enjoy, at their ease, the amusement of reading in the newspapers the exploits of their own fleets and armies. To them, this amusement compensates the small difference between the taxes which they pay on account of the war and those which they had been accustomed to pay in time of peace. They are commonly dissatisfied with the return of peace, which puts an end to their amusement and to 1,000 visionary hopes of conquest and national glory from a longer continuance of the war. The return of peace, indeed, seldom relieves them from the greater part of the taxes imposed during the war. These are mortgaged for the interest of the debt contracted in order to carry it on. If, over and above paying the interest of this debt, and defraying the ordinary expense of government, the old revenue, together with the new taxes, produce some surplus revenue, it may perhaps be converted into a sinking fund for paying off the debt. But, in the first place, this sinking fund, even supposing it should be applied to another purpose, is generally altogether inadequate for paying, in the course of any period during which it can reasonably be expected that peace should continue, the whole debt contracted during the war, and, in the second place, this fund is almost always applied to other purposes. The new taxes were imposed for the sole purpose of paying the interest of the money borrowed upon them. If they produce more, it is generally something which was neither intended nor expected, and is therefore seldom very considerable. Sinking funds have generally arisen not so much from any surplus of the taxes which was over and above what was necessary for paying the interest or annuity originally charged upon them, as from a subsequent reduction of that interest. That of Holland in 1655, and that of the ecclesiastical state in 1685, were both formed in this manner, hence the usual insufficiency of funds. During the most profound peace, various events occur which require an extraordinary expense, and government finds it always more convenient to defray this expense by misapplying the sinking fund than by imposing a new tax. Every new tax is immediately felt more or less by the people. It occasions always some murmur, and meets with some opposition. The more taxes may have been multiplied, the higher they may have been raised upon every different subject of taxation. The more loudly the people complain of every new tax, the more difficult it becomes either to find out new subjects of taxation, or to raise much higher the taxes already imposed upon the old. A momentary suspension of the payment of debt is not immediately felt by the people, and occasions neither murmur nor complaint. To borrow of the sinking fund is always an obvious and easy expedient for getting out of the present difficulty. The more the public debts may have been accumulated, the more necessary it may have become to study to reduce them, the more dangerous, the more ruinous it may be to misapply any part of the sinking fund. The less likely is the public debt to be reduced to any considerable degree, the more likely, the more certainly is the sinking fund to be misapplied towards defraying all the extraordinary expenses which occur in time of peace. When a nation is already overburdened with taxes, nothing but the necessities of a new war, nothing but either the animosity of national vengeance, nor the anxiety for national security, can induce the people to submit with tolerable patience to a new tax. Hence the usual misapplication of the sinking fund. In Great Britain, from the time we had first recourse to the ruinous expedient of perpetual funding, the reduction of the public debt in time of peace has never borne any proportion to its accumulation in time of war. It was in the war, which began in 1688 and was concluded by the Treaty of Ryswick in 1697, that the foundation of the present enormous debt of Great Britain was first laid. On the 31st of December, 1697, the public debts of Great Britain, funded and unfunded, amounted to 21,515,742 pounds, 13 shillings, 8 1/2 pence. A great part of those debts had been contracted upon short anticipations, and some part upon annuities for lives, so that before the 31st of December 1701, in less than 4 years, there had partly been paid off, and partly reverted to the public, the sum of 5,121,041 pounds, 12 shillings, and 0 3/4 pence. A greater reduction of the public debt than has ever since been brought about in so short a period of time. The remaining debt, therefore, amounted only to 16,394,701 pounds, 1 shilling, 7 1/4 pence. In the war which began in 1702, and which was concluded by the Treaty of Utrecht, the public debts were still more accumulated. On the 31st of December, 1714, they amounted to 53,681,076 pounds, 5 shillings, 6 1/12 pence. The subscription into the South Sea Fund of the short and long annuities increased the capital of the public debts, so that on the 31st of December 1722, it amounted to £55,282,978, 1 shilling 3 5/6 pence. The reduction of the debt began in 1723 and went on so slowly that on the 31st of December 1739, during 17 years of profound peace, the whole sum paid off was no more than £8,328,354, 17 shillings 11 3/12 pence, the capital of the public debt at that time amounting to £46,954,623, 3 shillings 4 7/12 pence. The Spanish War, which began in 1739, and the French War, which soon followed it, occasioned a further increase of the debt, which on the 31st of December 1748, after the war had been concluded by the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, amounted to £78,293,313, 1 shilling 10 3/4 pence. The most profound peace of 17 years' continuance had taken no more than £8, holy moly, £8,328,354, 17 shillings 11 3/12 pence from it. A war of less than 9 years' continuance added £31,338,689, 18 shillings 6 1/6 pence to it. During the administration of Mr. Pelham, the interest of the public debt was reduced, or at least measures were taken for reducing it, from 4 to 3%. The sinking fund was increased, and some part of the public debt was paid off. In 1755, before the breaking out of the late war, the funded debt of Great Britain amounted to £72,289,673. On the 5th of January, 1763, at the conclusion of the peace, the funded debt amounted to £122,603,336, 8 shillings 2 1/4 pence. The unfunded debt has been stated at £13,927,589, 2 shillings and 2 pence. But the expense occasioned by the war did not end with the conclusion of peace. So that though on the 5th of January 1764, the funded debt was increased, partly by a new loan, and partly by funding a part of the unfunded debt, to £129,586,789, 10 shillings 1 3/4 pence. There still remained, according to the very well-informed author of the Considerations on the Trades and Finances of Great Britain, an unfunded debt which was brought to account in that and the following year of £9,975,017, 12 shillings 2 15/44 pence. In 1764, therefore, the public debt of Great Britain, funded and unfunded together, amounted, according to this author, to £139,561,807, 2 shillings 4 pence. The annuities for the lire, too, which had been granted as premiums to the subscribers to the new loans in 1757, estimated at 14 years' purchase, were valued at £472,500, and the annuities for long terms of years, granted as premiums likewise, in 1761 and 1762, estimated at 27.5 years' purchase, were valued at £6,826,875 pounds. During a peace of about 7 years' continuance, the prudent and truly patriot administration of Mr. Pelham was not able to pay off an old debt of £6 millions. During a war of nearly the same continuance, a new debt of more than £75 millions was contracted. On the 5th of January 1775, the funded debt of Great Britain amounted to £124,996,086, 1 shilling 6 1/4 pence. The unfunded, exclusive of a large civil list debt, to £4,150,236, 3 shillings 11 7/8 pence. both together to 129,146,322 pounds, 5 shillings 6 pence. Okay, I'm rounding to the nearest million pounds from now on. According to this account, the whole debt paid off during the 11 years profound peace amounted to only roughly 10 million pounds. Even this small reduction of debt, however, has not been all made from the savings out of the ordinary revenue of the state. Several extraneous sums, altogether independent of that ordinary revenue, have contributed towards it. Amongst these we may reckon an additional shilling in the pound land tax for 3 years, the 2 millions received from the East India Company as indemnification for their territorial acquisitions, and the 110,000 pounds received from the bank for the renewal of their charter. To these must be added several other sums which, as they arose out of the late war, ought perhaps to be considered as deductions from the expenses of it. The principal are, this kind of doesn't matter, he's got a chart here showing debts contracted, I guess. If we add to this sum the balance of the Earl of Chatham's and Mr. Calcraft's accounts, and other army savings of the same kind, together with what has been received from the bank, the East India Company, and the additional shilling in the pound land tax, the whole must be a good deal more than 5 millions. The debt, therefore, which since the peace has been paid out of the savings from the ordinary revenue of the state, has not, one year with another, amounted to 500,000 a year. The sinking fund has, no doubt, been considerably augmented since the peace by the debt which has been paid off, by the reduction of the redeemable 4% to 3%, and by annuities for lira that which have fallen in, and, if peace were to continue, 1 million, perhaps, might now be annually spared out of it towards the discharge of the debt. Another 1 million, accordingly, was paid in the course of the last year, but at the same time a large civil list debt was left unpaid, and we are now involved in a new war which, in its progress, may prove as expensive as any of our former wars. The new debt, which will probably be contracted before the end of the next campaign, may perhaps be nearly equal to all the old debt which has been paid off from the savings out of the ordinary revenue of the state. It would be altogether chimerical, therefore, to expect that the public debt should ever be completely discharged by any savings which are likely to be made from that ordinary revenue as it stands at present. Wow, I think that's going to be a good time to call it quits. We'll continue with Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations with our third read in Book 5, Chapter 3, the next time we get to it. And yes, from now on, just to save time, I don't think it matters. I don't think we need to round to the nearest 44th of a pence. So we're just going to start rounding to whatever the numbers before the first comma are going to be. So if it's like 649,000 something, then I'm just going to say 649,000. If it's like 32 million, I'm just going to say 32 million. So yeah, the next time that we get to this, that's what we're going to do, just to save a little bit of time as we read, not to confuse anybody. So until then, this has been Mike, signing off.